Hey there, guys. So, this week's episode is a bit of a shorter one, actually, and I found that's pretty common when I'm covering a comedy film. So this week's episode we'll be talking about the seminal comedic classic, Some Like It Hot, although I don't know if classic is necessarily a word I would use to describe this one. Ooh, foreshadowing. I'm such an asshole. Um, Enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of At the Movies with William Fletcher. As per usual, I am your host, William Fletcher, and this week I'm joined by AJ, a new guest for the show.
Yeah, hi everyone.
Yeah,
Very nervous.
yeah, it's alright. It's just
Yeah,
two people talking about things. It's not about a movie, rather, so shouldn't be too bad.
yeah.
Yeah, it shouldn't be too
Hopefully
bad.
not.
Hopefully, yeah. So,
Hopefully it's not as bad as the blonde backlash.
oh, yeah, yeah. For this week we'll be covering the Marilyn Monroe film "Some Like It Hot." As there's a, I was gonna say biopic, but from what I've gathered, it's not technically a biopic. It's more of a fictionalized version of her life.
Yeah, it would be a wild biopic though,
Yeah,
considering what happened.
yeah. Oh, yeah. "Some Like It Hot," and I picked this because it's arguably her most iconic film. It's the one that I think a lot of people know. It's very highly rated on most places, and I hadn't
Hmm.
seen it as well, so I figured it would be interesting to talk about. So yeah, this episode will be talking about the film and I guess touching on Marilyn Monroe as well. I feel like at points, but so yeah, I hadn't seen this film before this recording. Um,
Yeah, neither have
I, I didn't I didn't dislike it, but I didn't think it was all that amazing, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm with you. I was expecting it to be really good, but then it
Mm.
just sort of is good, but not amazing.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. So yeah, usually for this we'll sort of go in sort of chronological order through the plot. We won't talk about everything. We'll just sort of go through and talk about stuff sort of as it happens. But yeah, I didn't think this movie was anything too special, and I don't know if it's because I wasn't watching it sort of with a certain context, because this is an old. This is
Yeah,
from 1959, so I don't know if I didn't, watch the film with that sort of context in mind. But I don't think that really matters in a lot of cases. I think a lot of films from a certain, even old, like films older than this, I don't think need to be watched with the sort of context of the time period in mind.
yeah, I don't think so either. I agree. But it is funny looking at it today because of what's in this film.
Yeah. So yeah, sort of. I guess to sort of jump sort of into the story. So yeah, I didn't know much about the film. I did know that it's like sort of considered one of the best comedies ever. Uh, and I guess to start off, I found a few bits funny, but I didn't find it particularly hysterical, which I was kind of expecting, especially with the sort of knowledge of it being a comedy. Like,
Yeah, I kind of agree as well. As in, the plot is hilarious, but it doesn't make you laugh. It's just a funny scenario, I think.
yeah, that's sort of how I thought of it as well. I thought like sort of the concept and the plot and sort of what they were going for with it was funny. It just the execution like sort of wasn't there, and it just
Yeah.
felt it was just sort of missing something. Um,
Yeah, it felt like it had the jokey setups, but it don't have the punches. Just sort of make you
yeah,
laugh.
yeah, that's sort of a way I looked at it. There were a couple moments that I liked. sort of
Yeah.
comedic moments I liked, but overall I just thought it was a pretty uh, decent film overall.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think also I think it goes on a bit. I think like it's a bit too long. It's like a little over 2 hours or something, which I don't think is
Yeah, I think
particularly
that's my major criticism with this film as well. It's just the length.
because I think comedies usually are about 90 minutes, maybe 100 minutes,
Yeah.
but this film is 2 hours, and I don't really think it going that long works or is majorly justified in any way.
Yeah, it feels like some scenes were a bit too long, as in if you shortened it a bit, it would have been better pacing wise and a better film maybe overall. Just yeah, it dragged a little too long in certain places. Felt like
That was sort of my sort of that was the thing about it, that it just didn't work for me. I will say I don't think it's aged poorly. I don't like, because for those who haven't seen it, possibly listening to this, the main characters dress up as women, and it's not actually too. I didn't find it to be particularly it hasn't aged poorly in a way that I think it could have, if that makes sense. Like that's
yeah,
just
I agree. Yeah,
yeah
because whenever I look at an older film, I mainly judge it from today's standards, and this film just feels like it could have came out yesterday. It's
yeah
it's aged really well. I think that's one of its main positives.
it's aged well for a film that could have not, because it's got people dressing up as women, but it doesn't really, it doesn't like portray it as a negative thing that they're dressing up as women. It's more just like this is the sort of lengths they're going to avoid being found by these gangsters. Um,
Yeah,
but anyway, yes, there are these two musicians, and they sort of we sort of it's about their story and them and their sort of journey, and we see them like they witness a shooting, and they're sort of on the run from these gangsters, and as we were talking about just a couple minutes ago, that like this could be the makings of a really really funny film, and have like it's got a really good setup, but it doesn't, it feels half baked and doesn't exactly come together in a way that it feels like it should.
yeah, and to go on from your point from earlier, I feel like the subject matter could have easily been very derogatory, especially because it's from
Mm-hmm.
decades ago.
Yeah.
But it's handled well with care and respect, I think.
Yeah, I was reading something before that it was sort of a pioneer, I guess you could say, in films of sort of showing these kinds of things of cross dressing and that kind of thing in a positive light, and not and because it was considered a taboo subject to sort of talk about, which that makes sense for that sort of time, but it helped that sort of there was this thing called the Hays Code, which was a production code from the which is like a thing about sort of censorship and what films can and cannot show at us back then. And I think this was one of those films that started to change those sort of rules that have been put in place, and make it not as big of a deal and less of a taboo subject to portray this in a positive light as well on screen. I think portraying it at all was a bit iffy, but portraying it positively probably would have been considered worse than portraying it negatively, I think, which is a sad indictment on was a sad indictment on society then anyways. And it's interesting to see, because I wouldn't have expected a film from this long ago to have that kind of messaging in it, I guess is what.
Yeah. I also think it sort of makes this film stand out as a unique historical film. I mean, it's not historical, I guess, but as a film from the past, because most films generally are have like a Western sort of formula to it, whilst this film sort of stands out with its content.
Yeah, it's got a certain something about it. It feels different is because I mean it's a comedy, but it's not because I feel like this story could have been told more or less the same, minus a few changes to plot elements. If it was just like two guys, they were wearing different, they were just pretending to be other men, like I think
Hmm.
this kind of film has that kind of way of I don't know how to put it. Yeah, it's got a way of like I don't
I
really
think it
know
has
what
a
I'm trying to say.
way of like shining amongst the catalog or a library of older films.
Yeah, that's actually a good way of putting it. Yeah, it stands out more because of
Yeah.
how it's the sort of different way it's showing things. Yeah, and they dress up as women and they sort of go and they spend time and they meet and they sort of disguise themselves, they join this female band to protect themselves and to hide away, and then that's where we're introduced to Marilyn Monroe's character, and I thought again I didn't think she was particularly amazing. I thought the film was more or less fine. Like I didn't think the film, performance wise, it didn't do a whole lot for me.
Yeah, I think the same as well because she was alright and I really enjoyed her singing, but
Mm.
there are certain serious moments where she just it just felt flat, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like it, like so you mean like it was trying to hit like an emotional beat or something like that, and it just didn't
Mm,
land for. Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
yeah,
Yeah, and her whole sort of to skip sort of later on, her whole sort of love story with one of the main guys, it just didn't work for me, and I didn't really care about what would happen with them. It just I think I must have touched on it on the show before that I don't particularly care for romance stories. I think they're pretty. In fact, I think I would have touched on it last week's episode, but I don't care for love stories in this film. I'm not particularly invested in. I'm not particularly invested in the story they're trying to tell here. If I'm being completely honest, it just doesn't work for me.
yeah. As in the love story, I like the comedic aspects of it, of trying to get Marilyn. But once
Yeah.
it happened, it just it felt rushed. It felt unearned, and that's why I think it sours the film in a
Mm-hmm.
way.
I think also just sort of my knowledge on Marilyn Monroe as a person and how sort of horrible her life was does make it kind of harder to enjoy, like
Yeah,
seeing her
yeah,
in a film. And I usually that doesn't necessarily bother me, but and I don't even know if it necessarily impacted my enjoyment of the film. It just was something in the back of my mind because I was watching this on Amazon Prime, and they have that X-ray feature where it has like trivia
yeah,
on the film,
yeah.
and there was one where it says that Marilyn Monroe was pregnant during filming, and then it just mentioned, and that's why she looks heavier was the phrasing they used, and also, and then it just started talking about she had like multiple miscarriages or something, and I'm like, that doesn't need to be there. Like that's not
Yeah,
right, and it's just and it's funny not because of that what happened there. It's just funny to me because like you don't need to know that. That doesn't. It's not really to do with the film. It's just information that I don't need to know about. Like
yeah. It's like the information is so out of place, it makes it funny.
yeah, exact. Yeah, and miscarriages are terrible things, but it's just so not necessary to the information. Like if it had just said that she was pregnant while filming or something like that, that probably would have worked more. The extra information just did not need to be there. I do like the thing I do like to get back onto the film and onto a lighter note. The whole thing of the main what's it, Joe, is he the, yeah, Joe is the one, yeah, Joe, and Sugarcane, who is Marilyn Monroe's character. I do like the whole sort of having to switch between personas thing he has to do, where
Yeah,
he's like on the beach, and then he has to go back to the room, and he has to be his female
yeah,
self, and that, but I feel like they didn't get enough out of that. I feel like they could have gotten a bit more out of it in terms of comedic moments, and there just wasn't enough of that.
yeah. I mean, that moment in particular was quite good. It was well executed. It was
Mm,
quite funny.
yeah,
But yeah, there just wasn't enough, really. It
mm.
needed more of those sort of scenes.
Yeah, that's the sort of problem I had with the comedy in this film. So last week I talked about the Clerks films for the new one, and this is sort of on an opposite spectrum to that in terms of comedy, where the Clerks films to me have a lot of comedy, and it's not funny enough to warrant there being like so much comedy. Whereas this
Mm.
film uh, doesn't have enough comedy. I was expecting more comedic stuff in this film, comedic bits and jokes and that, and this film doesn't have that, and that's sort of the problem. Is these films are sort of on an opposite spectrum of like, you know, one has too many jokes and not enough of them are funny, and this film doesn't have enough jokes that are fun. Like it's very muted, I think.
As in, I mean, do you think it was intentional for them to not have as many jokes? Because I
Uh,
read that Marilyn wanted to do serious roles later in her life.
okay. Well, possibly. I'm not actually entirely sure because I think that I mean maybe that was the point is that she wanted to have a more well, yeah, if she wanted to do more serious work and, uh, I guess that makes sense, but I feel like it comes sort of at a detriment to the film
Yeah,
because the film isn't funny enough to sort of justify being a comedy. Because when I as I mentioned before, this is lauded as a great film, considered one of the best comedies ever, and that kind of thing. And I went in and I expected a lot of jokes, and there just wasn't. And I've seen films from like the silent films from the 20, from Charlie Chaplin and like Buster Keaton, and those films are silent, but they are sort of just a joke a joke every a minute, like think
yeah.
it just sort of continues and goes on. And whereas this is very much, I could tell where they were meant to be jokes, but they didn't land for me. I
I
know.
think it
Oh, sorry.
suffers more in the final act.
Like when they're sort of from. I mean, this is jumping ahead a bit, but
Yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
no, that's fine. Sort of from what point do you mean like you think a lack of jokes is what sort of makes this sort of final act suffer?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Because it was so jam-packed at the start, it just fades away towards the end.
Yeah, there's a lot of yeah, it sort of feels like honestly, I can't think of too many jokes from the film honestly that really stood out to me if I'm
Yeah.
being honest. I which is probably not a good sign because I watched it. I finished watching it earlier today, so I figured I would have remembered. So I remember like a few jokes, but and there were a couple bits that I did like, but they're in the latter half of the film, I think. But yeah, so yeah, they go undercover, these two guys, and they go. Yeah, they're traveling with this female band. To sort of get back to the film, that is, they're traveling with this female band, and again, there's a
So it
few.
was
Pardon,
so it
sorry.
was like traveling with like a female band
Mm-hmm.
because they were running away from the mobsters.
From the gangsters, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some stuff on the trains. There's some stuff on the trains, and there's sort of bits where the two guys are sort of where because they're still guys, they're being. She's like, oh, is it am I too close to you or whatever? And he's like, oh no, that's okay with me? And I'm like, I'm not sure if I think if that's if I because like I don't I think that kind of stuff maybe that hasn't aged as well depending on who you ask. I think that's a bit more
Yeah.
up in the air, and I'm just sort of like, well, I mean, I don't really mind it. I'm just like, that's not funny. I think as sort of time has progressed, that kind of comedy isn't as funny anymore. At least from my perspective, that is. I don't know
Yeah.
how you feel about it, but
To me, I think it's funny in a way because it is not accepted anymore. So
oh,
it
okay, yeah,
being so out of place is quite quite hilarious now because it's not really accepted. So seeing these sort of behavior that's not normal.
yeah. That's actually sort of
Yeah,
an interesting discussion. Is there the two guys? They're a bit creepy. They're a bit They're
yeah,
not the most likable men, and they're sort of the protagonists, and I guess you're sort of meant to want to root for them. But it does make it hard watching because a lot of the men in this film are very, uh, inappropriate, as I guess the best way to put it, with a
yeah.
lot of the women. And I do feel like at some points, though, maybe that's kind of I mean, that's kind of the joke, and maybe sometimes it was kind of interesting because I felt I just sort of had this realization now that some of the film feels self-aware enough to know that the guy's being creepy or inappropriate or whatever. They know it's a bad thing and they're making a point out of it, and sometimes it feels like they're not. Like if you get what I'm trying to
You
say.
know, I agree. Yeah, like parts of it, it felt like they were poking fun out of guys who do these sort of behavior, and
Yeah.
other parts it seemed to dismiss it.
So it does try, kind of create a bit of a weird message. It's sort of just like, well, so how am I meant to feel about this then? Like, am I meant to be like laughing at these guys, like, oh man, that's, can't believe guys are like that? Or am I meant to, like, it's at points sort of like, so am I meant to be laughing at this or not? Which I feel like is a bad sign for a comedy if I'm like, well, is that what is that the stuff I'm meant to be finding funny or not? Yeah, the guys, well, the band, they stop off in this sort of beach, right? They sort of stay at this sort of massive resort, and
Yeah, like this. Yeah,
I feel like this is the point the film goes on too long because a lot of the film is them at this resort. Like I think sort of everything before that, basically from when they arrive there and everything before them arriving there, I think that's all pretty well paced. Actually, I think that all sort of goes at a decent pace. Everything moves along. Everything stuff's happening, and then there's just a lot of stuff with them. The rest of the film is them at this sort of resort place, and that's the part where it all slows down, particularly in the middle. Everything it just takes a while to get to the point.
yeah, no, I agree. I think it really drags just before like the major performance in that film.
Yeah, and I was yeah, because I saw beforehand, I was like, oh, this film's like 2 hours. I'm like, oh, I don't, because I was like, is this film gonna justify being 2 hours? And I don't, yeah, it doesn't really feel like it does because some of it's just like, okay, we're just taking forever to get to the point, and I feel like sometimes that's like what they're trying to do with the jokes is they're like, it's taking like sort of one joke is when a bunch of them, like a bunch of the women, they go swimming, and then the Joe, he's as his other sort of his second persona is that he pretends to be this like oil this yeah like millionaire, I guess. He's pretending to be this guy, and then we see what's his the other guy's name in it?
Daphne.
Daphne, yeah, or Jerry is his yeah, um, real name, and he's but Daphne, I guess technically sees yeah Joe, and it just like a lot of like it sort of gets to he stops and then he like walks back but very slowly, and like I think that's sort of an obvious point, like, oh, that's where I meant to laugh, that's what I meant to find funny, but it just doesn't really work for me if I'm being honest.
It felt like because they had so few jokes, they wanted to litter them and stretch out every joke as far as they can. They just wanted to make the most out of what they had. It felt like the jokes, they just weren't as impactful enough, if that makes sense. It's like they were funny, but they didn't make you laugh.
Yeah, a lot of the film is just them on this resort. But, I mean, yeah, the rest of the film is them on the resort, and they. I one of the bits I did like is when Joe he goes back to their room, and he's in the bath, and there's he's just all these bubbles and you just can't see his body, and then he stands up out of the water very slowly, and he's still got like the millionaire costume he had on before. I thought that was like one of the only bits that was like, oh, that's actually quite good. I do like that.
Yeah, yeah. That was like one of the only memorable moments from this film for me.
Because in theory, this should be funny. Because it's sort of an escalation of absurdity that these two guys are going through to stay disguised or trying to sort of live these other lives, and I really wanted more sort of absurdity in the comedy.
Yeah. What did you think about the mobster stuff?
I think it is fine as like a an explanation as to why these guys are in that position they're in.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
honestly, I kind of forgot about it. Honestly, I at a certain point, because we don't really see them. They're like right at the beginning where they execute those guys, and then they're right at the end where they're killed themselves. At the end of the film, and so like 90% of the film or so doesn't have them in it, and so
yeah. I mean, I'm the same as well. Whilst I was watching it, I completely forgot, just like the guys, I suppose. But then they come back, and it's not really fully resolved. It had a funny moment when they came back, but it didn't really interact with the guys again.
it's weird because I understand why they're there. They're there to create the story and to give the framing device and to explain why these guys would be doing the sort of absurd things they're doing, and going to these lengths to protect themselves. But they're not in it enough. They're kind of just forgotten about. And same with like the police officers as well. Like they're at the beginning of the film, and then we don't see them again until the very end.
Yeah, I mean, the police characters, they just felt extremely cheap and lazy because they didn't really serve anything other than be a plot device. I mean, I think it would have been funny to see the police interact with the guys because of what the guys were getting up to.
Yeah, because there's no because the police is pretty they're pretty innocuous. Honestly, they like there's not really they don't really they're pretty irrelevant, honestly, to the film for the most part. Like, you could
Mm.
more or less remove them from the film, minus. I mean, I guess the sort of opening of the film is, the police raiding the speakeasy, and so that's why the guys are running away and they get into the position. But, like, you could pretty easily write around it and find another reason why that would happen. I feel like I'm being more negative on the film than I probably am. I just think that there was potential with this film that wasn't capitalized on, which is the problem. Really, is I'm I feel myself getting disappointed in films that have the makings of a great film that I would love, and then they don't capitalize on it or they don't go all the way with their concept, and it just sort of disappoints me. I think.
Like, I'm confused as to why it's regarded as a masterpiece. Perhaps it's because of its uniqueness, or maybe it's just aged, poorly in terms of we've seen better comedy films.
Yeah, maybe that could be a possibility. Is some people who love it, because I feel like this could, because maybe some people saw this as a kid and it was like a massive influence on their sort of style of comedy or their sort of sensibilities towards comedy, and or some people sort of view it in a certain context.
There isn't much that would have been changed in a modern context, but it could still be altered to be a better film because the concept is so great,
Mm.
just lacking in a few directions, whether that's the acting or the writing.
Yeah, because I found a lot of the time in comedies, movies and TV shows, typically the main characters are not the most likable people, and sometimes like we root for them, but like we are shown like yeah these aren't nice people. You shouldn't like these people really. But I feel like in this film we are meant to like them. Like yeah, we're meant to like them, but they're not actually particularly likable.
Yeah, yeah. I think they were likable at the start, but then they start to make a few choices that just scream, you know.
Yeah, problematic. And
Yeah,
I do think that the subplot with Daphne and Osgood and their sort of thing, that was one of the better subplots in the film. I actually found it to be reasonably enjoyable.
yeah. And it has this sort of optimistic angle to it once you reach the ending,
Yeah,
which was which was a pleasant surprise given the time period it came out.
yeah. I was kind of expecting a sort of moment where Daphne, reveals herself to be reveals himself to be a man, and there's this big falling out, and they have this argument or whatever, and they he yells and everything because Daphne feels this sort of this that well they are lying to Osgood because they are a man, and I think that's kind of a sort of way of an interesting. I think it's sort of an interesting way of sort of tackling that kind of thing, and like the sort of scene where you sort of cut back to them and they're sort of dancing, which I thought was actually one of the better moments of the film. Honestly, I thought that was a really nice bit.
Like I really enjoyed that dancing moment. I really enjoyed the singing moment as well.
Sorry,
Yeah, for
which
the
singing moment? Sorry, were you referring to?
I think I think it's in the middle of the film, like the big moment in the hotel.
A bit that I felt that wasn't really they didn't do a whole lot with was when well, no, Josephine, um, Joe he takes off the Josephine costume he was wearing, and he leaves like the earrings on, and I felt like they could have gotten a lot more of him forgetting to take bits off that
Mm.
Monroe's character would notice, and then he'd have to have come up with this sort of outlandish explanations like, "Oh, I've got earrings because whatever," and then, "Oh, I've still got this on because of that," and so on and so forth. And they didn't do it again. It's just not going all the way with the comedic bits.
Yeah, if it had those little touches and these little jokes sprinkled throughout, it would have just been a lot more funnier and a lot more interesting, I think,
Mm.
especially when it reaches those pacing issues towards the middle and the end.
Sort of like given it basically great comedy is sort of presented to them to be used, you know, super well, and then they just sort of don't go all the way with it, which is disappointing. That, and I think we've touched on it quite a bit throughout this, but it is sort of a something that doesn't work in a way that it should. I think.
Yeah, and I think we're only touching on it a lot because it's one of those points where it could have made this film really great
Yeah, and I
rather
think
than it just being decent.
yeah, and plus it's also kind of the problem with most of the scenes in the film. Honestly, is there could be so much more comedy, and there's so much great opportunities for just brilliant bits of comedy, and they just don't capitalize on it because there's so many bits where I'm like, oh, there could have been something really funny there or here or at this point, and then it's just nothing, and I'm just like, right, well, we're just whatever, and it's just annoying.
I mean, another positive that I can give this film is that the outfits were really good. In general, I think for the guys in particular, I think was a special standout. But in general, it was pretty decent as a production as well.
Yeah, I think sort of technically the film is well made. Like it looked like, it's shot very well, and the editing is good, and everything like that. It's just sort of the script and performances that are kind of the weak parts that sort of are like, this is not as good as it could be. Yeah, it's like the main part is the script really and performances, but I think that's probably down to the script as well, as it's not giving them more
Yeah, it's not giving
opportunities.
them enough, yeah, more opportunities to make jokes or be humorous.
Yeah. So yeah, they've sort of got this thing, and then there's the whole. So yeah, we sort of getting towards the end of the film. After Joe and Sugar have had their sort of night. Well, Osgood, who Daphne is seeing, has proposed, and he's accepted it, and then he's doing it for sort of selfish reasons, for monetary gain, basically, and they sort of have this sort of going back and forth bit of just sort of like, well, you can't actually marry him, and it's like, well, yeah, but if I do, then I can divorce him. We get divorced.
I suppose a lot of this film has this undertone of selfishness or self-preservation about it, because a lot of these actions by the guys are driven by this sort of need to preserve themselves for their own
Mm.
self-interest.
Yeah. Then yeah,
Becoming girls, pursuing Marilyn, going on the yacht.
yeah. That's sort of the thing about it too, is that they yeah, because they sort of go after, they sort of they want to get with Monroe's character, just because of the physical sort of looks, and they don't, before they even really get to know her, and they pursue, well, Joe pursues her throughout most of the rest of the film, and then yeah, a lot of the film is just sort of about these sort of selfish people and their wants, and but they don't really get punished for it. Like, Joe has a happy ending,
Yeah,
which I don't know
maybe
how I feel
maybe
about.
given the context of the time, it's supposed to say, take risks and build,
Possibly.
yeah,
And like, he kisses Kane without her consent, which is a bit iffy, but I
yeah,
think that's pretty common in a lot of films. The sort of protagonist will kiss the sort of female lead, whether it's warranted or not, and even if it's appropriate or not. One thing I did notice actually is how well the two guys ran in heels,
yeah,
because I'm just like, there's like, that just seems, that's like the most unrealistic part of the film. Like, there's no way anyone can run that well while wearing heels. Like, from what I've gathered, I've never worn heels personally, but everything I know tells me that it's a fucking pain, and it's awful, and it sucks, and it's not enjoyable.
yeah. I wonder how many takes it took to get that right.
Yeah, because like there's sort of stuff early on where one of them is walking, and they're just like, oh, they're like, oh god, this hurts. How do women do it? And I'm just like, and then yeah, by the end of the film, they're running upstairs and stuff in them, and running down hallways, and I'm like, god, that's gonna hurt their feet though, like, because I
Mm,
know that even just walking in heels is a massive pain. So I imagine running would be 10 times worse, because it's a faster movement, but
yeah,
I think sort of the third act is kind of where everything comes alive, where the gangsters are at the resort. I think everything sort of comes alive and is sort of more interesting when they're there, because it's sort of, it's like, oh yeah, this is the plot of the film. This is what was sort of set up at the beginning is now being paid off at the end. But it's just
Yeah,
too little, too late. I think.
yeah, especially because the middle bit sort of mellows out, and once the gangsters return, it sort of reignites that comedic flair again.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't say the middle. I would say the middle is just like slow. I was gonna say a slow burn, but I don't. It's not really a slow burn. It is just slow. It's just like,
Mm.
okay, can we just get on? Can we just sort of move along with this and get to the point and get to the important stuff?
How did you find the whole mobster meeting? Because I really liked the head honcho of that meeting. I thought he was
Yeah, I thought he
decent.
was one of the actually funny parts where
Yeah,
where they talk about taxes and stuff, and he's like, oh, you know, what is it even he says again? He's like, oh, we played. He's like talking about like paying taxes and like, oh, we don't pay taxes or something like that. Like I like that kind of sort
yeah,
of bit. I
yeah,
thought he
that
was one
kind of,
of the probably the best sort of performance in the film, and one of the better parts. I would say he's like an actually entertaining part of the film. The whole though part where there's the guy in the cake and he pops out and he shoots the gangsters that failed. I was like, oh, that's very out of nowhere, and I was kind of expecting it to sort of swerve and sort of trick the audience, like, oh, this is what they've planned. This guy's gonna pop out of the cake and he's gonna shoot them, but then he'll pop out and he'll get shot or something like that. Like, that's just sort of how I felt it was going. And it's like, no, he just pops out of the cake and he just shoots the gangsters. And I was like, oh, well, that's very anticlimactic.
I mean, I suppose it helps keep the film light because you sort of eliminate that issue.
Gangsters being
Eliminate,
killed with a guy popping out of the cake and shooting them.
yeah, I mean, it makes the film lighter in terms of removing that issue from the
Mm,
audience and the plot.
yeah.
But it would have been nicer if it resolved in a different or more satisfying way.
Yeah, I do kind of think I kind of like how sort of elaborate it is. It's like this guy, he's just hiding in a cake when it could have just been so sim. It didn't have to be that complicated. They literally could have just had a guy walk into the room with a gun and then shoot, like walk in from behind and shoot them or something. Like, it didn't need to be, they had to make him a cake for his birthday, and he's like, oh, it's in 4 months. Like, so when he says that his birthday is in like 4 months, or whatever, I was like, oh, so he knows something's gonna be up and he's gonna shoot the guy or something. That's sort of
Yeah,
how I thought it was going, and then it doesn't, and yeah, it does. It resolves the sort of those gangsters going after the two main guys, but I just don't think it feels like a bit of a cop out, and just like
yeah,
they sort of wrote themselves into a corner and like, oh, how do we get the guys out of this? And like it's kind of a Deus Ex Machina, isn't it? Like, it's just
yeah.
something that sort of comes out of
And then
nowhere.
the police come in to stop the Italians going after the guys.
Yeah, the two guys, they're like, oh, we should probably get out of here, and yet they run out, and then
Yeah,
they get chased, but the police come in and arrest the rest of them, and I'm like, oh, that was just that was such an easy way of just wrapping up the story, and we don't. I mean, because this is towards the end of the film, and yeah, we just see the two main guys, and then running off, they're running around and all that. I'm just like, okay,
it's like the film's plot also lacked a punchline.
yeah,
They just,
mm,
yeah,
yeah, I think that's it's a way that's a decent way of putting it. It kind of. Yeah, again, it's again the police being there is also sort of a Deus Ex Machina. It's getting the characters out of trouble just by
mm,
being like, oh, we've got some characters who will come in to save the day and to capture the bad guys, and that's it. And it's just sort of a bit weak. And I think I think the sort of scene, the sort of part where Joe and Daphne, not Daphne, well Joe, well Josephine rather, and he goes down and he hears Kane's character singing and they kiss. It feels a bit like, okay, that's a bit iffy, and then she's like, oh, and then I guess she sort of realizes that, like, oh, he's the guy she saw before on the, he's the millionaire, and then, Daphne's calling Osgood to take them on a boat, and it just feels like a bit too complicated. I kind of would have preferred if Job had just sort of said like a quick goodbye and then left. And she didn't come along with him. I felt that would have been more impactful and probably worked a bit more for me, I guess.
Yeah, plus, surely it should have crossed her mind. Why is the millionaire guy pretending to be a girl in an orchestra?
Yeah, that she would have. I kind of thought that like she wouldn't be there at the end, because they sort of keep talking about throughout the film. Well, she keeps saying that she's like not the brightest girl or whatever, and I'm like, oh. So I mean that seemed a bit weird to me, but I was like, oh, maybe that'll come back at the end. He'll do this sort of big gesture and he'll leave, but she won't put it together because she's not the brightest girl, or whatever. But no, she puts it together and she gets with him, and I don't really care for it, honestly. And I was like, okay, that's a bit meh. I didn't like it. I didn't like that sort of thing, that part sort of too much, if I'm being completely honest.
It just felt too convenient, and removing like the comedy parts because for the sake of convenience.
Yeah, and it's, I guess, too much. I think it would have worked better if it was more of a sort of dramatic ending, like he says goodbye and he knows he can't be with her or whatever, and she doesn't, or maybe she tries to get there, maybe she just puts it together and she tries to get there, but like the boat's already left or something, and she sort of has to watch him leave from the pier or something. I think that would have worked better, personally.
The whole film felt a bit too samey towards the end. It needed a few things to rock it in terms of momentum or tone.
Yeah, and it goes on a bit, and it does just sort of feel like it's just sort of wasting time. It's like not like there isn't like a lot of the middle portion is just like waiting, is just sort of for the audience being like just waiting for the plot to go along. Like, okay, come on, when are we getting to the the story? And it just doesn't happen. And then when it eventually does, I'm like, oh, that's right, there's meant to be this big sort of story thing, but it took too long to get there, so I'm not that interested anymore, rather, and I'm kind of bored by it, rather. I do sort of like the final exchange between Daphne and Osgood, where he's like, oh, I probably shouldn't be marrying this, rich millionaire, so he's naming all these things of like, oh, why we can't do it. And the guy, he just keeps going through all these things, and he's like, oh, oh, you can't have kids? We'll just adopt some, and oh, you smoke? Doesn't bother me. Which, eventually, Jerry, says, I'm a man, and then Osgood is like, well, nobody's perfect. And then that's sort of which I think is actually a pretty solid joke. Probably my favorite joke in the film, in a film of not particularly strong comedic bits, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
But I did think it was, a pretty solid joke.
And I think it helped the film that one of the best jokes were left right to the end.
Yeah.
So you sort of leave the film with a good feeling rather than
a
being
negative.
a bit bitter.
Yeah. And because I saw a review of someone talking about comedy, one of their favorite teen comedy, and they talked about how Bridesmaids had sort of the craziest sort of funniest bits early on in the film, whereas Some Like It Hot leaves the best joke till the very end, and I was like, and then I was kind of sort of watching this film, and I was like, oh, I'm probably not gonna like the final joke, am I? And then it happens, and I'm like, oh, that's actually quite good. I actually really like that joke, and I think it's a nice. It's probably my favorite sort of part of the film. Probably, I actually did really like it. I think, this film, there isn't, it's a comedy, because it's not actually as much to talk about as there is with sort of certain other films. I think, like, I mean, do you have any sort of final things you want to say in the film before we get ready to wrap up?
I mean, I sort of agree. I think comedies and sort of lighter films are hard to sort of dissect because it is, it is what it says it is on its tin.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
There's not as much to say if as opposed to sort of a big drama or anything like that.
yeah,
Yeah, I think we have touched on everything I wanted to. It's not as long as I was expecting it to go, but I mean, it's a 2 hour film, and we have talked for less than like a little over half of that, which I feel like is a sign of a film that goes on too long. Like, 'cause, yeah, comedy. I don't think a comedy should go over 100 minutes realistically.
yeah, definitely.
So yeah, did you want to put a rating on this film?
I'm gonna go with an 8. What about you?
I'd go a 7. It's a pretty sturdy 7. Like, it's not particularly weak or anything. It's just the comedy for me doesn't work well enough. Which is the problem, really, is that the comedy doesn't work well enough, and that's what really holds it down. I'm usually with, if I don't find a comedy particularly funny, or I don't even find it funny at all, that already drops it like by at least 3 points, maybe more. For me, a comedy really needs to be funny to
Yeah,
get more points on a rating. But I was happy to sit through it. I'll probably watch it again. Yeah. So just before we wrap up, I figured we might as well talk about Blonde, because that has been premiering at festivals and such, and people have opinions. I've not been keeping up with everything about the film. Have you been keeping up with this film and sort of reviews and a lot of consensus thoughts and that kind of thing?
yeah, I
Okay,
have. So mainly it's divisive based on gender mainly. It
okay,
apparently guys seem to like it a lot, but girls seem to hate it a lot,
okay.
sort
Is
of
there
thing.
any sort of underlying sort of is there sort of similar things that like men like in the about the film? I presume, from what I've heard, there's a lot of nudity.
Yeah, so it really benefits the male gaze, which
Oh
obviously
yeah,
is
of
like,
course.
yeah,
Okay.
because a lot of the film is in nudity from what I've heard,
Hmm.
and there are some scenes that are very controversial and problematic,
Yeah,
which can be disturbing to watch.
I've heard there are certain um I've been aware, like, there's this film I've talked to people about this, and I was, because I was like, oh, this is like a fictionalized sort of story about Marilyn Monroe. Okay, I'm not necessarily against that, but then I heard sort of because it's based off a book and sort of the controversies around that book, and I'm like, oh, that's not gonna be fun to watch, right? Because I wonder how I'll feel about the film, because I am a male, but like I don't know. I mean, yeah, I really have no idea how I'm gonna feel about this film. Honestly, it
Yeah,
could
I
really
mean,
go either way with me. I think, honestly.
I really love the two teaser trailers from the film,
I
but
like, yeah,
I'm really unsure if I'll like it or not because I did enjoy Man, which I know is also a divisive film, but
yeah,
I remember disliking Titan, which was also, quite divisive as well. So I don't know
yeah.
which way I'm gonna go with
Mm.
this film once I've seen it.
Yeah. I mean, the only reason I was ever really interested in seeing it was because Anna de Armas is in it, and I,
Yeah,
I figured, like, you know, like, if nothing else, I'll be getting an Anna de Armas as Marilyn Monroe performance. Like, that's all I was like. Yeah, I'll see it like just for that. But I also
mm,
kind of want to see it because of because it's so divisive. I do want to see how I'll land on that sort of scale of like, oh well, I think it's good, and or well, I think it's bad, and I mean, I'll probably be in the middle, honestly.
Yeah.
But it's one of the more interesting films I think this year is that has come out this year because it does seem to have, depending on who you ask, it typically because mainly from gender, from as you mentioned before.
Even though it's received a lot of backlash, there
Mm,
is still praise for its cinematography, its score, like the
yeah,
technical elements. There's just a lot of criticism with the script, which is similar to the film we just talked about.
yeah,
I
exactly.
suppose.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, that's what I've heard is that like it's shot very well. Like I mean, it's black and white cinema. It's in black and white, but it sort of is sort of it uses it, and it's the cinematography works well, and and from what I've heard from most people, they seem to agree. Ana de Armas is pretty good in it. Is from what I've heard for the most part. I think because
Yeah,
I remember
but I
people were
have
sort of iffy on the were like, oh, can she, pull it off for multiple reasons. I think some people like, oh, she doesn't look enough like her, she's not doesn't have the physique, or will she be able to look, the
mm.
accent and everything. And I was like, I don't really care. It won't bother me that much, but yeah, it'll certainly be interesting to see what it will be. And it comes out. When does it come out on Netflix? Like the
I think late September.
Yeah, I think it was meant to be out on like the 23rd or something, but I think they've pushed it back, I think. I
Yeah, the official release date was the 23rd, but it might have been pushed back.
Yeah, so it says here it was released at Venice on the 8th of September. United States on the 16th of September. I think that's just for its cinema run. And then 28th of September on Netflix. So
Yeah.
in a couple weeks time, which will be interesting to see how I feel about it in about a week and a half. But I think that's
Yeah.
all I've really got to say. Is sort of any things you needed to say before we wrap
No,
this up?
I'm good.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, thank you all for listening to this week's episode. Do you have any things you want to plug before I end this thing, or not really?
Not really.
No.
Thank you for hosting me.
No, that's all good. If you want to come back in the future, that's fine. You can come back again for another episode in the future if you want.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you all for joining me for this week's episode, and I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.